Life during the Great Depression. First of all, it's important to understand the significance of this economic collapse that had kind of taken over the country within really a matter of a year from October 1929. Unemployment eventually reached about 25%, which means 1 out of 4 people who were trying to find a job could not find a job. And many jobless became homeless and would line up outside privately run soup kitchens for food. It's really important you understand during this time there was no such thing as welfare, there was no government assistance. The only help that people had came from private charities. In search of a better uh, work or a better way of life, many homeless, unemployed Americans began walking or hitchhiking or riding the rails across the country. Riding the rails is riding hop and freight trains. These are the people that were referred to at the time as hobos. Newly homeless people put up shacks on unused public land. They called these places Hoovervilles, after the president they blamed for their situation. Tar paper or cardboard or corrugated metal shacks. No plumbing, no heating, no electricity, obviously. And at the same time of the Depression, we have this atmospheric environmental disaster known as the Dust Bowl. Crop prices dropped in the 1920s, and farmers tried to make up the difference by planting more wheat. If you're going to make less money per bushel, then you got to plant more bushels to make enough money to pay off your bills. Then a terrible drought struck the Great Plains. So there was this vast dust bowl stretched from the Dakotas to Texas. And you'll notice in the part that's kind of that rust colored there in northern Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Kansas, Colorado, that's where the worst of it. But the effects were felt all through the Great Plains and into the Midwest. Wind blew the dust, darkening the sky for hundreds of miles. Here's a photograph of an approaching dust storm. It is the damage it caused was unimaginable, and really was caused because the overplowing and really poor farming practices of more and more marginal soil trying to eke out a living. And when the drought hit, and it was a multi-year drought, this was the impact. Dust buried crops and livestock. Humans and animals caught outside during the dust storm sometimes died of suffocation when dust filled their lungs. It was like a snowstorm, only it was dust, dirt. And at the same time, we have this overwhelming economic, environmental disaster. And if you'll notice, if you want to, you should take a look sometime at the high temperatures for like Des Moines, Iowa. Many of the highest temperatures recorded were in the summers of say 1933, 1934, 35, in that time period. So we have horrible economic conditions, uh, millions of people unemployed, homeless, and on top of that, this environmental disaster that, unlike derecho, that came through in a day and the effects may have been felt for a few weeks, this went on for years. And so people looked to escape, especially into movies and radio. The Wizard of Oz, which I'm sure you recognize, was from 1939. And it's really the classic example of escapism of movies during that time period. The hard times of the 30s led many Americans to want to escape their worries, and they would typically do that by going to movies. And one reason is because movie theaters oftentimes were the only air conditioned building in the community. Movies and radio programs became increasingly popular. During the 1930s, more than 60 million people went to the movies each week. This is at a time when the country's population was about 130 million people. So they would sell 60 million tickets in the course of a week. Tens of millions of people listened to radio programs daily. Some of those popular radio programs were soap operas. Um, I'm sure you're familiar with that term soap opera. We think of them as daytime TV shows now, soaps. These were serial dramas. Originally, they were serial dramas using melodramatic situations and often sponsored by companies that produced laundry soap. And these were programs on the radio, and they became known as soap operas. And so these were just a couple of the ways that people looked to escape their terrible troubles of life during the 1930s.